On today's show, Glen Willis is back. We're diving into Kobe Bufkin on today's podcast in two different parts, and part one's coming to you right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1784 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Rowland, coming to you on a Monday morning here in mid to late August. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app right now, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. I also want to encourage you, as I always do on the podcast, to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out and subscribe to the podcast anywhere you might find your podcast. That includes Apple, includes Spotify and Overcast, as well as YouTube on the video side. Go ahead and like this episode as you're watching it on YouTube. Please subscribe on that video-based platform. Today's show is going to be two parts. Part one is coming to you right now as you're listening to this with my friend Glen Willis joining me to continue our player capsule series. So if you missed anything in the past several weeks and months, honestly, we began this even before the draft, talking about all the key players on the Hawks roster in their own standalone episodes. Today's episode is going to focus on Kobe Bufkin, the second-year guard, first-round pick about a year and a half ago, etc., and plan to get into with Kobe. Not a ton of news going on in Hawks land right now, as you might expect. Media days like 6 weeks away still, so we're kind of in the dead zone at this point in time, but still plenty to discuss on the podcast. And at the end of part two, we'll have some extra sprinklings of some sicko stuff when it comes to Hawks fans, and hopefully you will enjoy this conversation. So without any further delay, here we go. Myself and Glenn talking about Kobe Bufkin. I am joined once again by my friend Glen Willis, a true sicko at all times, especially today, as we'll get into later on in this discussion. How are you, sir?
Yeah, I'm good. Out here too, all the kids are going back to school, so we're all dodging germs at work and trying not to get all the normal exchange of all that stuff. So if we can get through the first 2 or 3 weeks, typically we're in good shape. So,
yeah, this is Glenn's flu game, everybody. So my thanks to Glen always, but especially today, he's not feeling at the top of his game, so he's still plugging through, and I appreciate it. If you've missed it, I'm sure I plugged this already before you listen to this, but we've been doing these conversations about the whole Hawks roster. We're getting through it. We got a little bit to go still, but a fun one today, I think, a guy that you and I both quite enjoy, and that's Kobe Bufkin. I think this is an interesting one because he just hasn't played that much, which we'll get into, of course, as one of the big themes of this discussion. But I think we might even go back to like a year ago on Kobe Bufkin. He had played Summer League, I guess, a year ago, but I know you've always liked Kobe, but I'll frame it this way. What has changed for you? Has anything changed for you? Are you still going off of like a lot of your pre-draft evaluation? It's a tough one because of just how little he's played. So I'm wondering kind of where your head's at as we get into this discussion.
Yeah, so I think it's a great place to start the conversation. I think two things have changed for me. One is I was impressed with the versatility he showed defensively his time at College Park, right? Not just defending on ball, but functioning as low man, helping at the rim, his timing, his spacing, and his kind of help technique. He just did a lot more work and showed just a lot of proactiveness and attention to detail on defense that I thought might take more time to come. And maybe he's even already in some areas beyond what I would have expected, especially a young guard, right? So that's there. The other thing that's changed is, if you had asked me a year ago, I would have had some hope that he might be able to step into year two and be the full-fledged, fully loaded up backup point guard. And now I'm worried I don't know if his body's ready for that. He's had, pretty good string of injuries that are there. I don't want to say he can't do it. Some things are bad luck. Some things are, hey, how are you handling the wear or tear and those sorts of things. And so I think I would have expected at this point to feel like, oh, he can give them 14 minutes a game or whatever as the backup point guard, maybe even spend 3 or 4 minutes, a little bit of time off ball playing with Trey as well. And I don't want to sit here and say that I know he can't do that. I would just say what's new is I have concerns about that being the plan for 82 games for this season. Number one, I think offensively, he's not as ready as he would have been had he been able to play more last year, especially down the stretch. And so I think there might be – I think the defense I don't really worry about so much. Maybe we're all accustomed to see a certain level of defensive play from guards that we're like, it'll be fine. Anything good is good and helpful, right? But on the offensive end, just the reps just haven't kind of been there. And my concern is if they want to get off to a fast start, that him being the guy who handles the backup point guard minutes every single game, I don't feel great that he's ready for that.
Yeah, I was gonna get to that at some point, but let's just start there actually, because number one, we should plug the podcast that you regularly do, which is ATL 129. You guys talked about this quite a bit on your show the last couple of days, which I appreciated. I poked fun at you all on Twitter about how I was yelling at you through the phone, which did happen, but that was more of a kind friendship yelling than anything else. But this came up about Kobe being the backup point guard, right? So I have said that I would not be surprised by any outcome, basically, in a lot of rotation decisions. And I'm not doing that on purpose. I don't like to hedge like that. It's more that it's mid-August and they haven't met for camp yet. And I like to kind of incorporate intel on this stuff about what I've heard. And, you don't hear as much right now. Guys are on vacation and all that stuff. I think logically, if you look at the depth chart, I think you probably agree with this, like he kind of slots in as the backup point guard in some respects. But I'm also with you that it's not like it's an absolute lock that he's going to be in that role. And part of that is just how little he's played. Part of that is, you mentioned the body stuff. It's a big drop, a big difference. This is one of the things about not having DeJounte is that they don't have the built-in backup point guard on your roster that they've had the last 2 years when they've just done the pure stagger. And they have for basically 2 straight seasons. If Trey and DeJounte were healthy, one of them was on the court at all times. And that was literally on purpose. They just did that at all times. And it's the first time they obviously can't do that. And there are other options too. We don't have to get into the whole discussion about the other options. Dyson Daniels, of course, has played some point guard. They had Keaton Wallace. But you say you don't really not that you don't buy it, but I'm assuming it's the offensive end of the floor that you're concerned about mostly at point guard. Is that a fair assessment? And also, let's just dig into that because, like, what could he show, let's say, in camp that we won't see or in a preseason game that can assuage the coaching staff? Because that's the biggest thing. He doesn't have to sell it to us. He's got to sell it to Quinn about, like, being the guy for, 14 minutes on opening night because, Trey's going to play a lot, et cetera. It's the offense, I assume, and, like, where can he kind of progress and maybe shore that up in the next – maybe not now, but between now and October, but once they get into camp, because it's kind of a short runway once they actually get there.
Yeah, so for me, I don't have any problems or concerns at all with him running the pick and roll. I mean, he sees the whole floor, he makes the read, all that sort of stuff. When it's one of the more common defensive schemes, when it's drop, when it's a switch, whatever those things are. But anytime it might be a hard hedge or a trap or ball pressure into the screen, I just think facing that against actual NBA defenders is a completely different challenge to face. And he just hasn't had a chance to kind of work through that stuff. And a lot of smart defensive teams, even a lot of kind of average defensive teams, are just going to try to get really physical and aggressive with a young guard that's just not that experienced. So that's the stuff I think that comes along. And for me, like, I feel like if Quinn decides we're just going to roll with Kobe by, I don't know, late December, January, he'll be fine. He's smart. He adapts. He applies learning. He actions feedback loops, all that sort of stuff. And so for me, it's kind of a strategic decision on, are we going to prioritize just getting Kobe settled into that role and trust that he's going to do it sooner than later? Or are we going to live with some, are we worried that we're going to live with some inconsistency across the first 30 games of the season or whatever it might be? And so it comes down to that. He's really good off the ball, which kind of gives him some flexibility. He's great split cuts on the weak side, kind of screening for the other guy's space on the floor, cutting, and so he does a lot of proactive stuff when he's off the ball. The question that you have is that where he's going to be able to apply himself given the current construction of the Hawks roster? Because there's not really anybody else. I mean, I think Hawks fans are rightly to be curious about what can Dyson actually do helping run the second unit offense. Can that be shared responsibility between he and Kobe? Could that help Kobe settle in a little bit? Because Dyson shows some decent stuff in Olympics play that you never got to see from him in New Orleans. And so for me, it really is what happens against a really aggressive defense, against a really physical defense. Because there's no way for a young player to acclimate to that until they just go through it, with some consistency to know what it takes to kind of manage through that. If someone's just running straight drop or just straight switch or whatever, I have no concerns about that. He sees the floor, his processing is great, he makes the right reads, makes the right pass, makes the right play. Really consistently, it's the other, aggressive defense or junk defense stuff that he's probably, to me, not had the chance to kind of see how actual NBA defenders do that stuff.
Today's show is brought to you by BetterHelp. And when you're thinking about your absolute non-negotiables for self-care, what do you think about? Maybe you actually never miss yours. That'd be awesome, of course. But when your schedule is packed with projects or travel, it can be hard sometimes to make time for yourself. When you feel like you have no time for yourself, those non-negotiable things like therapy become more important than ever. Therapy is helpful for everyone, honestly, and can help you focus on what you are looking for, what you want, instead of what others might happen to have. Then that starts to help you live your best possible life. You can learn positive coping skills, set better boundaries. I have my own stresses in my life, of course, and we also benefit from getting things off our chest sometimes. And the folks at BetterHelp are really helpful with that. If you're thinking about starting therapy at all, give BetterHelp a try right now. It's entirely online. It's designed to be convenient and it's flexible to your schedule. And that's really huge if you are someone like me navigating a lot of sort of time crunches like I often happen to be. BetterHelp is awesome with that. And all you have to do is fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist. You can also switch therapists anytime if you want to for no additional charge. Never skip therapy day with the folks at BetterHelp. And you can visit BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA to get 10% off your first month with BetterHelp. One more time, the place to go is BetterHelp. That's BetterHelp. BetterHelp.com/LockedOnNBA. As you kind of said, it's a lot about prioritization, which is part of the reason why we just can't know right now. And like, I'm not trying to pass it off like I don't know anything. You always hear stuff, and you're around the team in summer league, but Kobe didn't play summer league, and that was injury related. So that was, I think, if he had played, maybe we would have learned some more information, not necessarily about the way he played in the games, but like even intel stuff. Part of that's like, I'm glad you brought it up because it is prioritization. Because you could go into the season and say Kobe's our guy at backup point guard, unless he proves he can't be, basically, or maybe it's some sort of battle. Maybe they go into the season trusting Dyson more. And look, there are different positions. Dyson, as we'll get into in a different discussion about him, I think you and I agree, is not really a point guard, but he has point guard skills. He was drafted that way. He was drafted to be a guy who could play a little bit of point guard. I think you agree. Let me ask you this before we get to other stuff about Kobe's offense. Either way, with Kobe or Dyson, or if you want to say Keaton Wallace in the deeper scenario, a lot of that placates like they need bogey with those guys. I think that kind of has to be the plan, I think, and that's pretty logical the way it's been for a long time. But when Trey sits, it feels like it needs to be Kobe or Dyson and bogey. Maybe you could try some Kobe and Dyson. There may be some shooting questions there, but like two ball handlers, I don't think that you're going to see the same reliance on one guy that you see when Trey's on the court with Kobe or Dyson. Like it's going to have to be some secondary stuff from other guys.
Yeah, agree. And then Hawks fans probably ask us too, like, is we in the mix there at all? And with Bogey on with Bogey on the floor, more realistic, I think, similarly to Dyson, right?
Yep. And
that sort of stuff. And Kobe's shooting is interesting because I think he's going to progress to eventually become a fairly consistent shooter, not a high level 39-40% guy. That's not really what you need from a guy who has his creation skills. But when you're giving him, we're going to play you on the ball, we're going to play you off the ball. Off the ball, we're going to give you responsibilities X and Y in it. There's also strategic prioritization around what you're going to prioritize developmentally. And in that sense, like, do we just want to work on his point guard stuff right now, not necessarily kind of get him into catch and shoot so much? And so it'd be interesting to see like what they're doing with him the first couple of preseason games, but presumably we'll get to see him play. I think that could tell us a lot about kind of what the developmental plan for him is. But bringing Veet back helps reduce some risk around him. Keaton's ability to defend, especially bigger guards, gives him more flexibility positionally. And Dyson, for sure. That Dyson has some nice, point guard skills from a dribble pass kind of standpoint. And I mean, he showed an improving ability to kind of use his length at the rim and attack the paint and those things. But with his length, he's such a good cutter, and he puts so much pressure on the rim uniquely for a guard that if you feel like you have to kind of make him your point guard, as in setting up the offense every time down the court, you could say you might be punting on some of his other primary value that he offers if you don't have the right lineup and rotation construct. I think ideally you want him in a more kind of versatile offensive role as well, taking advantage of all of his tools. And so, I mean, last year, you and I both appreciate how Trent Forrest plays defense, but like when either Trey or DeJounte was hurt, and Trey was hurt for down the stretch for a long time. Yep. Any minutes where Trent was running the offense was hit and miss at best, and those sorts of things. And so Keaton can actually do things offensively that Trent can't do, and Keaton's not some high level offensive player, but he's legitimately what, 25? He's 25. He's an experienced guy at this point in time. He's developed a pull-up shot that works. Don't think you want to build a whole second unit offense around that as a primary thing you lean on. But late shot clock, he's comfortable kind of getting to some emergency stuff that like Trent's was never going to do. And so, you and I have talked some, and not to rehash all conversation, that to me, like 9 through 17, this roster is so much better than they were last year. And at least they have some fallback options. Not necessarily guys who are going to like give you a step improvement on the second unit, but guys who are going to just raise the floor of that unit's play, almost irrespective of which of the 4, 5, 6 players, considering when they might be in the season, do that. So I feel like, on one hand, I am nervous about Kobe just being ruled out there. I like bold decisions, and so a little part of me kind of hopes like, yeah, just give him that opportunity. The other part is like, man, how much is he going to get hurt this year if he's playing 14 to 16 minutes a game every single game? Yeah. But the nice thing there is, like I said, they have other options to kind of fall back on if they run into that situation.
Yeah, and we'll move off of this and go big picture back to Kobe's like skill set. But I just wanted to always talk about this at the beginning because I do kind of lean that way. Like just based on, again, it's still very early in this process. I think the question is the rest of the roster, which you guys did a good job breaking down, and I'm going to do a lot of the podcast a little bit later on, like just the rotation and the numbers game, because look, the if everybody's healthy situation in the NBA very rarely happens, which is also worth noting. Like there's a reason why guys ends up staggering all those things, because not everybody's healthy all the time. But if everybody's healthy on opening night, they do have kind of a numbers game, and it's not a problem. It's a good thing. It's just that not everybody can play. So maybe it's Kobe doesn't play opening night, and people panic about that or whatever. I would understand it. And speaking of which, we should zoom out a little bit with his actual skill set, because last year he played a lot in the NBA when he finally got there as a shooting guard in some respects. Like I'm using big finger quotes if you're listening on the audio side of things, because he was playing with Trey or with DeJounte some. It's always interesting because he was drafted as a combo guard. And that could be a taboo word. I hope it's not, because for me, it's not. I think the Hawks don't view it that way either. But Kobe, even dating back to his time at Michigan, played some off the ball. Later in his career, played a little bit more on the ball. The Hawks have always talked about how he could play both guard spots, and they value that. He's got enough size to play the two. He's got great size for a point guard. All those things. Defensively, he can hold up, as we'll get into later on in this discussion. But it's interesting that they've also purposely, and I know you've seen that dating back to his first summer league, they've been purposeful in his development, playing him almost exclusively at point guard. He played point guard pretty much all the time in summer league his first year. And in the G League, he was their point guard. Like full stop, he was their point guard. And the numbers were great. I mean, it's the G League, so it's grading on a curve a little bit, but he averaged like 24 points, 6 assists, and 5 rebounds a game in the combined 14 G League games he played, which is great. Obviously, it's better to be good than bad in the G League. He was efficient there too. He shot well from 3 on pretty good volume. I think actually more than 7 attempts per game. And that some tough shots in there because he was the guy. Like obviously he was the guy on the G League team, which makes a lot of sense. But I mean, what do you make of that development plan and how it manifests? Because on one hand, they will tell you that he's coverable at both spots. And you mentioned already his off-ball ability, which I definitely am intrigued by, but they're also purposely giving him reps on the ball. And on this team right now, not to go back to it again, but like they don't have another guy that's like the clear backup point guard type. So that's kind of what he might slot in as. It's just interesting. I kind of agree with it. I think it's good to develop him. And I think they're purposely taking it slow with Kobe. Part of that was the injury that kind of had to last year. But what do you make of that? Like, is that archetype that even makes sense? Because the big question, of course, long-term is like, okay, 3 years from now, Kobe works out, quote unquote. How does that work with Trey? Like, how is that all supposed to happen for a guy that was drafted in the first round? Because you know this, I hate this thought process, but a guy drafted at 15, if he's not starting every game by his third or fourth season, it's like, oh, what's going on with this guy, you know? Today's show is brought to you by Gametime, and Gametime is the best place to find tickets. There's nothing like checking out a live event, whether it's sports, music, theater, or a comedy. And at Gametime, they have a new feature called Gametime Picks that makes getting tickets even easier for you. They filter out all the stuff that you don't need and only show you the incredible deals on great tickets that you actually do need, so you don't have to waste any time searching through thousands of different ticket options on the app. For example, there are awesome deals this week for Braves Phillies in Atlanta, a big-time showdown in the baseball world, including a pair of tickets for $16 each, including fees, on Tuesday. That's a really awesome deal, and there's a lot more of that happening at Gametime. Plus, it's my personal favorite feature of Gametime as well, and that you can view the seats through all-in pricing if you want to, want to toggle that option on. So you have to have any surprise fees at the checkout screen when you get to the end. Also get a panoramic view of the seats that you're looking for in the app before you buy them, so you know exactly what you're getting into when you get into the venue, when you arrive. And you're also getting the lowest possible price guaranteed with the folks at Gametime. Take all the guesswork out of buying tickets with the Gametime app. Download the Gametime app right now, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem that promo code. It is LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download the Gametime app today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed.
Yeah, so for me, them playing him at point guard, I think suggests a couple of things. One is that's where they want to invest most of his development to make sure he can do that stuff, right? Whether that's the plan long term that he's like splitting time across the 1 and the 2, or playing almost all of his time at the wheel, I think it's a little bit open ended. I think the second part is, and it's interesting, I think back to a conversation we got to have with him after a game in Summer League last year, where it was asking him, hey, the first couple games kind of been up and down. The first game was really on the rough side. Second game was more up and down. And I asked him, I said, how do you stay aggressive after a couple of turnovers, after a couple of missed shots, And he just looked at me and said, if you don't stay aggressive, it just gets worse. Right. And so I think they want him to be a very aggressive player. Right. I think they want him attacking. And if you go back to sort of all the way back to, let's kind of think through the pop tree at this point in time, like Tony Parker, always probing with that dribble, always attacking the paint. Teague, same thing, Bud, Schroeder, different form of that. But I think that whole coaching tree starts with, look at Ja up in Memphis with Taylor Jenkins, and Ja has a kind of whole different kind of physical set of skills and tools and stuff like that. But I think it all just comes down to who works if our point guard's not aggressive. I think they just want to kind of have him lean really, really into an aggressive attacking style. And when you talk to him, the couple times I've had a chance to talk with him, it's not like he's this, pound your chest aggressive, like you think about like Draymond's kind of really outlandish kind of aggressiveness that he's always putting out there. It's more of a surgical kind of aggressiveness that he has. And I think that a team and an organization has to empower a player to lean way into that, to get them to fully become that person who's like, I'm going to be aggressive. I'm going to stay aggressive. My team needs me to stay aggressive. My team believes in me to be aggressive. So I think the point guard play is really about, Kobe, we want you to lean way, way into this aggressiveness, because that's the way to maximize all of the different things that you can do. So for me, like a little bit of it's just like, he didn't play a ton of point guard before he got here, so we need to let him play some point guard. I think the other part is just getting him to be a super aggressive player.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that in the NBA, this is only one number, and turnovers can be overrated in some respects. But only 10 turnovers in like 200 minutes in the NBA is really good. Now, part of that, again, he was playing off the ball more than he would be in playing point guard. But I think they like the fact that he can take care of the ball. They like the fact that he does more than point guard stuff. And just to get into his skill set a little bit more, like he was an elite finisher in college. And I don't say that casually. Like elite's the word that's appropriate for the way, like his numbers as a finisher at the rim, which is not the first thing you think about when you think point guard. But he heated up the rim. I think he shot 67% on shots at the rim in half court in college, which is like in the Big Ten. You're not facing like space floors in the Big Ten. If anybody watches Big Ten basketball, it's kind of a slugfest. He shot really well actually on twos this year in the G League in a decent sample size, which is again not a great thing for. I should say it is a good thing. A good thing for point guards. So I don't know. His aggressiveness is something that I don't worry about. I think that his handle could probably use some upgrade. I think it's already gotten better. Does that make sense? Is that something you've seen on film with him as well?
Yeah, and so two things. One, the finishing, to have a young guy who can get to his floater right hand and left hand that's bonkers, right?
They love that about him. They love that about him. They're not afraid at all about him going to the rim. Good free throw shooter, all those things.
Yeah. Oh, take his left hand away. Kobe's like, fine. On the other side, the ball handling, it's against ball pressure. It's against big physical defenders, right? That's where the thing kind of becomes loose and you kind of cough it up. And which is where he just needs to realize, like, oh, I've got a 6'1", 180 guy on me right now. he's not going to push me around and kind of work across my body and get to the ball. Or, I've got Lou Dort on me right now. I've got to be a little bit more careful with the basketball and manage my space differently. And so I do think in that sense, it's situational and kind of matchup driven where the ball security can start to show up. Drew Holiday, okay, you got to be a lot more careful with. There's just defenders that Scott, and I'm using extreme examples there, right?
Sure.
But that, to me, that's where the turnover stuff shows up, is just kind of recognizing what a specific defender can throw at you that maybe few other defenders in the league can.
Yeah, and I think there's a happy medium which every guard has to find. Every young guy has to find between aggressiveness and being silly, and being able to take care of the ball. Because while they want him to be aggressive, and Quinn is a big proponent of guys being aggressive, not only with hunting their own shot, but just not playing timidly. He does not like that. He does not like timidity, generally speaking, from guards. But there is that medium where you can't turn the ball over a lot. You got to be able to be comfortable within the system, and that's something we probably acknowledge. But they love Kobe's makeup, which is part of this. This organizationally, I know Quinn, the front office, that's one of the reasons they like Kobe a lot, is that they just really buy his mentality, which we already talked about. Just want to say that out loud. And he played. This is according to Cleaning the Glass, about 243 possessions last year as the point guard, meaning no Trey, no DeJounte, no Trent Forrest, no Patty Mills. So just Kobe as the guy. And the overall results were actually fine. They had a -1 net rating, which is about what they were for the season. So that's not too bad. But it was the offense that took a dip, and the defense was better. And we'll get to the defense in a second, I promise, because that's a really exciting place to go with him. But I'm just wondering what you think is a reasonable projection for him offensively in year two. Because again, he only played 200 minutes in the NBA last year. And a lot of that was, I do think, just to say this, I do think that people were really mad about him not playing at times last year. I have full confidence, intel and otherwise, that if he had not gotten hurt, if he had not broken his thumb at a very, very, very bad time for a rookie guard to break their thumb, what was it? It was in October, right? It was very, very early in the season.
Yep.
If that hadn't happened, he would have played a lot more, both injury-wise and just development-wise. They would have played him more. There have been more nights where they would have had Trey out and DeJounte out, somebody's out. That's unfortunate. It's the same with Mo Gay, who we talked about on one of these mini capsules. But putting all that to the side, the fact that he is going to miss part of his second-year summer too, forget the role for a second, because that's part of this. I guess it's part of it. You don't have to forget it. But what's the reasonable projection for him as a second-year player on offense? Because we're going to get to the defense in a second, but we look up in March. Where do you feel good if you're watching Kobe play offensively? It's February, March, and he's gotten to this point. What would be a good progress for him in year two? Again, acknowledging all of the setbacks so far.
Yeah, I mean, so there's some kind of baseline level things. One is the offense doesn't look completely crater when Trey goes off the court, right? That's
a big one.
Yeah, that's a big one. And the second thing is, and I really don't want to look at numbers. Like someone asked me points, assists. I mean, we'll talk about it defense. He's a phenomenal rebounder for a guard. But for me, it's consistency. It's month over month over month, just becoming more consistency, cutting down on your turnovers, becoming more efficient, shot selection, and then just kind of be able to kind of move the ball and work. Move the ball, move off the ball, move back on the ball, and be really aggressive when you move back on the ball. Quinn wants the ball to move and wants the ball to be shared and all that sort of stuff. And so for me, if you're seeing just whether we use true shooting percentage or the team's offensive rating when he's running, there's a lot of noise in individual rating on either end of the court, but maybe in larger samples, it's a little bit more informative, that sort of thing. And so for me, it's just efficiency, just more consistency and more efficiency across that season. And then just increasingly looking, it's kind of funny. So this is a more qualitative thing, but just looking like a real NBA point guard a little bit more every month, right? You watch him play, he's he's legitimate rotation point guard, And like I said, I think October, November, it might be up and down, and even into December a little bit. If they lean way into him having that role, I think by January 1, he's starting to kind of really, really settle. That's what I trust. I think the key there is if that costs you, say, 4 wins over the first 40 games of the season, 4 wins is a lot in half the season.
Yeah,
that's a
lot.
It's a lot.
If they think it's that many, they won't do it. By the way, I'm pretty sure if they think it's going to kill them like that, they're not going to do it. But
and that is where lineup construction. Like, I know they want to play Jalen with Trey a lot, but do you give like Jalen would really help a guy like Kobe, and is it less with Hunter, in having Hunter, how do you kind of sort all of that out, right? Which center is going to play predominantly? It's like, those are all other podcast topics, I'm sure. But to me, I think early on, I think you might feel like, man, they really have to be quite specific about how they construct lineups that Kobe's a part of. But by January, if you don't feel like that's so critical to get exactly right, that to me demonstrates Kobe is making progress. And that, like, okay, Bogey doesn't have to be on every minute Kobe's on. That's a big step of progress that's there to kind of help you kind of sort that out. So for me, it's just consistency, efficiency, and then looking like a guy who's growing and continuing to grow into the role.
Yeah, I don't want to overstate the G League numbers, but he did do everything that you would want a rookie first-round pick to do in the G League. It's 14 games, but he put up like star-level numbers in the G League, which, again, I'm not saying that's going to be end-all be-all, but that's what you want to see. And he was efficient. 58% true shooting in the G League too, as a high usage guard, is intriguing, and that's more of the role that he might be in the NBA. Not that level of minute wise, but that's like when Trey sits kind of level. If he's the backup point guard, again, if he would be kind of more in that realm of role than what he would be playing otherwise. And maybe he's so good. Like, I look, and the smart money would be on an injury to somebody else at some point. Like, let's just say Dyson gets hurt for 2 weeks. Can Kobe be the guy who plays with Trey sometimes? Like, I think if they're fully healthy this year, you probably won't see Kobe with Trey a ton. But teams are not fully healthy. We kind of understand that's not going to happen. Yeah. If something happens to Dyson or whatever, he becomes, as we'll get into right now, actually, a pretty interesting defensive piece.
Yeah. But yeah, so last thing is, you mentioned it, being drafted in the middle of the first round and being essentially too good for G League your first year is a great start to career. So
that's 100% right. And I think he was. I mean, basically, if you would assume that production continued for the rest of the G League season, and I think there's a reason it would. I watched a lot of his G League games. I don't watch every college park game. I always raise my hand and say that. But when he was there, it was much more intentional watching because the first round pick's there. It's like you kind of need to watch it more. Yeah. He looked great. He looked great to me at that level. So that's one thing. It's not the NBA, but I think that was a positive development. All right, that is all for part one of this 2-part conversation. So if you want to stick around and listen to the rest of the conversation, this should be available in your podcast feed of choice right now. Part 2 should be there, sitting there waiting for you. Hopefully you can click on over to that right now and listen to it with Glenn. Please go ahead and subscribe to this podcast as well. Anywhere you might find podcasts, we are on Spotify, we are on Apple, we are on YouTube, etc. Also follow the show on Twitter/X at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there if you want to at BT Rowland. If you want to also follow the rest of my work in the non-podcast space, you can find that at patreon.com/BT Rowland. I appreciate everybody listening to the podcast. One more reminder, part 2 is available for you right now on your podcast feed of choice, and we'll see you all next time.